Pixar is one of those big names that I think the vast majority of people know, even if they're not exact moviegoers. And sure, maybe the first few things that come to our minds when we think of it are the famous lamp or those childhood movies. But the company is not only great at storytelling, the story behind the company itself is worth hearing too. So in this video, that's what we'll do. And spoiler alert, my favorite part may be the one involving Steve Jobs' role on the success of the company, and how, when he invested on it, he hardly had movies in mind. Yet his investment made him win billions of dollars. Surely you have seen, or at least heard about Toy Story, the 1995 movie. Well, this film is kind of special because it became a huge success despite only being the first Pixar movie, and also because it was the first feature-length film to be entirely computer animated. Nonetheless, said movie is the result of 2 decades of hard work. In 1974, the Computer Graphics Lab, or CGL for short, is established with a long-term vision of producing a film which was completely computer animated. Although when I say computer animated, I'm not referring to those fancy 3D animations that may result familiar to us today, but to the use of computers to facilitate the animation process, which studios like Disney were still doing by hand on 2D, drawing frame by frame. The CGL funding was coming from the New York Institute of Technology, which, as a curiosity, was founded by Alexander Schur, a Disney admirer. The CGL was receiving more than enough financial resources, but unfortunately, this could do little to improve the processing power of the computers, which at the time simply wasn't enough to fulfill the task of animating a complete movie. This situation brought financial troubles to the institute, and made the CGL team realize that if they really wanted to produce an animated movie, they would have to team up with an established movie studio. This is where Star Wars creator George Lucas and his obvious interest in computer animated special effects came into play. He invited the CGL team to work with him in his studio Lucasfilm. This new stage didn't shine because of its final products, but due to the development of tools, software and animation techniques, which eventually and altogether would result into more complex animations. Some achievements worth the attention are the short sequences included in Star Trek and in the young Sherlock Holmes film. Both examples may have been far from a feature film, but succeeded at showing the potential of the new animation technique. The good news wouldn't last forever though. George Lucas divorced in 1983, and the compromised financial situation in which it left him threatened to dampen the team's progress. Becoming an independent company seemed like the only way out at the time. To carry on with their deed, investors were required, so they soon began searching. In this process, they found an interested Steve Jobs, who had recently been kicked out of his own company, Apple. He was ready to invest his own money on the company, but as the story goes, George Lucas declined his offer at first, after considering it below what was fair. But being rejected by more than other 40 potential investors eventually led him to take Jobs' offer. He would pay $5 million for the rights to the technology and would give another $5 million to capitalize the company. Still, this investment wasn't enough. The technological limitations remained. Even while having the most powerful computers at the time, the rendering times made impossible a full-length film. So, while they waited for the processing power to catch on, and given Steve Jobs' experience, they decided to shift to the hardware business, in order to keep the company alive. But in this process, they didn't drift far away from their core purpose. The new product was a computer specialized in high-definition image processing. Its name, Pixar. This device was mainly aimed towards the geology and medical fields. Just as additional proof of their original goal not being forgotten, the computer's potential was demonstrated with animations rendered on it. A remarkable example is Lux, the famous desk lamp, which you surely recognize. There were a few versions of the device, but sadly none of them could be referred to as a success because less than 300 units were ever sold. Although in an interesting note, Disney had a bunch of these computers working on the Pocahontas movie. But coming back to Pixar, these poor results motivated Jobs to vote funnel more money into the company, and to take a more active role on the company's management. They focused once again into the animation business by producing ads for other companies. As for their hardware division, as the 90s began, it got sold to another company which, not long after, went out of business. From all this adversity, the most important event in my opinion was the nascent relationship with Disney. This would eventually consolidate into a $26 million agreement for 3 Pixar-produced movies, of which Toy Story would be the first one. Not surprisingly, after so many problems, not even this deal completely convinced Steve Jobs about going forward with the company. It is said that he considered selling it more than once, but just before Toy Story's release, the rumor had it that the movie would be a great hit, so he held on to Pixar. And indeed it was. The movie got more than $300 million at the box office, and went down in history as the first movie of its kind. At this point, many of us surely would think that this success would translate into a great and prosperous relationship between both Disney and Pixar, but it wasn't precisely the case. It became more of a complicated kind of relationship, plagued with discussions and disagreements. For instance, Disney did want that Toy Story 2 to be produced by Pixar, but only as a straight-to-video release. After insisting, Pixar convinced Disney for the movie to reach movie theaters, but at the price of the movie not counting for the $26 million deal. Many more clauses in the deal revealed both companies needed each other but refused to give in easily. The production costs, for example, were shared, but Pixar was completely responsible for the movie's production, while Disney was getting full ownership over the stories. Of course, Disney was also providing its name, the marketing management, and the distribution channels, all of which undeniably catapulted Pixar movies. With conditions as such, it doesn't come as a surprise that tension never really went away. Toy Story 3 would be another great example. As we discussed before, Disney had the rights to the stories. At any given point, they were able to release sequels produced by themselves if they wanted to, but a gentleman agreement with Pixar was enough to prevent that. At least until Pixar, having now a better position to negotiate, demanded ownership over its new stories, including the ones which were still in production and not released yet. Also, they demanded to get 100% of the profits generated by their movies, leaving Disney only with a distribution fee. You can imagine how Disney reacted. They cut ties with Pixar and shortly after announced that they would go ahead with Toy Story 3 without Pixar, by creating a new animation division called Circle 7 Animation. Pixar, on the other side, announced that it was open to team up with other studios. Now, we could argue that Pixar's new demands were the main cause of the rupture, and maybe they were. But we cannot simply ignore the influence of the people behind each side of the table. Steve Jobs on the Pixar side, and Disney CEO in those years, Michael Eisner. This became evident after 2005, when Disney changed its CEO, and shortly after, in 2006, a deal to acquire Pixar got to see the light. That's why you may remember Toy Story 3 being cancelled for some time. This was Disney's version. After the acquisition, the movie got back into pre-production state, but this time under Pixar's team lead. I wanted to share this part of the company's history because it shows that when doing business, money is not the only thing to look for. We can easily note how in this case, both companies were not only earning money, but in need of each other. Yet they refused to go on with working together, partly because of their managing team. And I say they needed each other because, on one side, Pixar kept prolonging the situation in order to assure its new movies like Ratatouille and Cars still had access to Disney distribution channels. On Disney's end, once was revealed that Robert, or Bob Iger for short, the new CEO who replaced Eisner, once attended a parade to celebrate the opening of a Disney park in Hong Kong, and there he quickly realized that it included only recent movie characters, none of which were created by Disney. It wasn't an ordinary acquisition in more than one regard. For starters, it was an all-stock deal. For each Pixar share, 2.3 Disney shares would be handed out, valuating Pixar at more than $7 billion. The process was completed in 2006 and made Steve Jobs the largest Disney shareholder with roughly 7% of the company. This was due to him having almost a 50% share in Pixar before the deal. If you ask me, receiving more than $3 billion for an original investment of only $10 million sounds like a huge win to me. Although if you have grown with Pixar movies, you may haven't noticed any big changes on its formula. This is because while negotiating, both parties agreed that they would work independently despite now being part of the same company. That's why we've seen both Disney Pixar and Disney's own animated movies. From a business standpoint, this move makes sense. It preserves that Pixar touch which the company embeds on most of its projects. Now, when I say Pixar touch, I mean the result they get because of how different from other studios they behave, and have done so since the beginning. For instance, in the early days of the company, the people making the films weren't directors, writers, or people related to the entertainment business. They were people with technical knowledge about animation. Still to this day, Pixar assures that the creative process involves mutual feedback among the team, and not from an external executive. They also tend to ignore the publishing calendar, which seems to rule most of the industry. You surely have noticed how every summer or Christmas season a lot of movies are released. Obviously, this has little to do with when the movies get finished, and more with how much revenue the movie is expected to produce. Well, it's not that Pixar drifts away from those specific seasons. It just happens that they try not to give in to the pressure of yearly releases, and only reveal their movies when they think high quality standards have been met. And finally, one of the aspects which may get belittled by many, but in my opinion, has a lot to do with their success, since it gets people excited and talking about their movies, is the attention to details. Depending on how much you pay attention or like their movies, you may have noticed connections between all Pixar films. Some are subtle, some are evident, like a character from a movie appearing on another one for a few seconds, be it like a toy, a piñata, or a silhouette. This has driven people with a lot of spare time on their hands to theorize how every Pixar movie is connected with the rest of them and how they all take place at the same universe. You can easily find lists full of Easter eggs and explanations about it by searching the Great Pixar Theory. And well, a truly special company if you ask me. A story full of turbulences, coincidences, and a great example of how sometimes you have to adapt or slightly rethink your path if you are really compromised with your vision. In this case, you have seen how much time and trouble they got into just to release their first movie. And I think almost every release after that has not failed to amaze children and grown-ups alike. They're not a one-hit wonder, and Disney will certainly make use of that on its yet unreleased streaming service. We'll see how that plays out. But until then, I'll be glad to read your comments. Which is your favorite Pixar movie and why? I'll see you on the next episode of Financial Titans.